There are places deep in the Appalachian Mountains where compasses spin, trails vanish, and time slips in quiet, terrifying ways. Locals don't talk about them. Hikers go missing without a trace. And those who return don't come back the same. Tonight's stories are not legends. They are real. Every account you'll hear has been verified through public records, law enforcement logs, and direct witness testimony. Some names have been changed to protect privacy, but every event is grounded in truth. If this kind of unsettling realism keeps you up at night, give this video a like. It helps more horror lovers find stories like these. Comment and tell me where you're watching from. You're part of my horror family now, and I want to know where my family's tuning in from. And subscribe if you want more stories that linger long after the screen goes dark. Now, let's step quietly into the mountains. I was halfway through pitching the tent when I first realized how quiet the hollow was. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet, the kind that makes your ears strain for something that isn't there. The air felt thick that evening, the way it gets before rain. I'd parked my truck off a narrow dirt path that cut through my late grandfather's land, just outside Harlan Hollow. He used to camp here with me when I was a kid, back before the mine shut down and the woods swallowed what was left of the old logging road. I remembered the smell, wet earth, pine, and that faint metallic scent that clings to mountain air. It hadn't changed. I'd come back to record ambient sounds for a freelance project. A few minutes of night noise, crickets, owls, wind through leaves. That's all I wanted. But really, I think I just missed the place. Or maybe I wanted to prove to myself that the stories he told, the ones that used to keep me awake as a kid, were just stories. He used to say, "Don't ever whistle after dark in the hollow, boy. You'll invite it closer." He never said what it was, only that it wasn't something you wanted, knowing where you slept. By sunset, my tent was up, fire going steady. I ate from a can, washed it down with lukewarm coffee, and sat listening to the woods wake up. The hum of insects built and fell like slow breathing. Fireflies blinked near the tree line. The light faded fast here like it always did, smothered by the ridges rising on either side. I kept telling myself I wasn't nervous, but every time I glanced toward the slope, I caught myself expecting to see someone standing there. I even laughed a little when I caught my reflection in the dark window of my truck, my own jittery face staring back. Around 9, the first breeze rolled through. The fire sputtered sideways, and a shiver ran across my shoulders. That's when I heard it. A low, hollow whistle drifting down from the ridge. Just 3 notes. High, low, high. Almost like the start of a tune you'd hum without thinking. I froze, hand halfway to my mug. Could have been a bird, or wind through the branches. But something about the pitch, too steady, too human, made me set the cup down quietly. I waited. A few seconds later, the same 3 notes came again, closer. It was instinct, I guess, that made me whistle back, same notes, same spacing. My grandfather's warning flickered through my head, but I brushed it off. Sound travels weird in these hills, I told myself. Maybe I was hearing my own echo, but the echo didn't come after. It came with me, perfectly in sync, like someone already knew what I was about to do. That knocked the breath out of me for a second. I stood, scanning the dark ridge line. My fire cast just enough glow to see the first few trunks, but beyond that black, the kind of black that eats the beam of a flashlight. I raised my light anyway. Nothing, just the hollow looking back. "Hello?" The word came out rough, too loud in the stillness. No answer. Only that faint hiss of wind threading through grass. I turned the flashlight off and listened again. Nothing. Maybe it was the way the sound bounced. Maybe I'd been imagining the synchronicity. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just broken some small, unspoken rule. By 10:30, the fire was dying low. I zipped myself into the tent, recorder set on a small tripod outside, aimed at the tree line. I figured if there was some kind of wildlife whistling out there, I'd catch it on audio. Might even make good background for the project. Inside, the tent smelled like nylon and damp leaves. I lay back, headlamp off, listening to the night press in. The insects had grown louder, a constant thrum that almost covered the faint creaks and snaps beyond. I tried to focus on that, the rhythm of it, but the more I listened, the more I noticed the gaps, tiny moments where everything cut out, like something was moving through. Then came the whistle again, same 3 notes, this time unmistakably at the base of the hill below me. I sat up fast. My mouth had gone dry. I didn't answer. Not this time. A minute passed. 2. Then another whistle, lower, stretched out, not the same pattern, but still mimicking. As if whatever was out there had grown tired of waiting for me to play along. I unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. The fire had dwindled to orange coals, painting the clearing in weak light. My recorder's red LED blinked steadily in the dark. Everything looked still. Then, something moved. A flicker at the edge of vision, left side, near the big sycamore. I swung the flashlight toward it, but all I caught were the swaying leaves. The beam shook in my hand. I stepped out barefoot onto cold earth, half expecting to see an animal bolting into the brush. Instead, I saw the pattern of the leaves stop swaying only in one patch, like something stood there, just still enough to blend. I didn't move for what felt like a long time. Finally, I spoke. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, softly from that same patch, 3 notes whistled back. Exactly mine. I backed toward the tent slowly, keeping the light on that spot. The trees looked ordinary again, empty. My heartbeat was hammering so hard it hurt behind my ribs. Once inside, I zipped the flap shut all the way and slid the locking knife out of my pack. I laid it beside me, blade open, just in case. I thought about packing up and leaving right then, but the rational part of me kept making excuses. Could have been a hunter. Could have been a hiker who heard me. Could have been Echo. I repeated those things under my breath like a mantra, until exhaustion finally smoothed the edges of fear. When I woke, it was 2:47 a.m. Something had brushed the tent wall, a soft drag like fingertips trailing along the fabric. I held my breath, listened. Then, the whistle again, right outside. Not distant now, feet away. 3 perfect notes. And before I could even process the terror of that, the sound came again from the other side of the tent. 2 of them, one higher, one lower, mimicking each other, circling. The coals outside must have gone cold, because there was no light, no shape, just the sound of soft steps in the leaves. Every nerve in my body locked tight. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I could hear my pulse thudding in my ears. The whistling stopped. Then came the quiet. That terrible, bottomless quiet again. So still, it felt like the woods were holding their breath with me. And then, a long exhale. Human. Right above the tent. I jerked up, hand on the knife, but before I could unzip the flap, the sound moved away. Slow, deliberate steps receding into the brush. No snap of twigs, no rush, just retreat. I waited until the insects started again before letting myself breathe. When daylight finally came, I crawled out, body stiff and shaking. Dew had settled thick on everything. The clearing looked normal, too normal. My recorder was still blinking red. I hit stop, rewound, and played back the night. Static at first, then faint insect hum. Then, the whistle. Clear as day. I could hear my own voice afterward, the, "Who's there?" Then the reply, crisp and close enough that it didn't echo. I dragged the recorder inside the tent, and listened to the rest. Around the 2:40 a.m. mark, there was something else. A soft scrape, then breathing, right against the mic. And one last sound before silence. A whistle. 4 notes this time. A pattern I'd never made. That's when I realized something that froze me worse than the sound itself. Whistles don't echo in the hollow. Granddad had told me that once, sitting by a campfire on this very ground. He'd said the shape of the valley swallows the sound. You can call out all you want, but it won't bounce back. So whatever had answered me, it wasn't a reflection. It had learned, and it was closer than I ever thought. The sun that morning looked dull, like it didn't want to rise. The light came slow through the trees, silver and pale, and the fog in the hollow clung low, curling between trunks like breath that wouldn't leave. I didn't pack right away. I just sat there, knees drawn up, recorder on my lap, replaying those 4 notes again and again. Every time, it made my skin crawl, not because of what it was, but how human it sounded. Too precise, too calm. Like someone standing inches from the mic, whistling into it with a smile. When the clip ended, I noticed something under the static that hadn't caught my ear before. A faint, rhythmic clicking, almost like tapping on metal. Slow, measured, tap, 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 pause, whistle. It didn't match the sound of the wind or my gear. It sounded deliberate. I rewound again, pressing my ear close to the tiny speaker. There it was. Tap, tap, tap. Then, a drag, like a nail across plastic, and beneath it, so faint it was almost imagined, a low hum. That was enough. I decided I'd been there long enough. I tore down camp fast, barely folding the tent, hands shaking the whole time. Every noise, every squirrel, every snap of bark made me twitch. When I went to load the last bag into the truck, something caught my eye. Boot prints. At first, I thought they were mine, but they weren't. The treads were narrower, the heel pattern older, almost smooth. They circled my tent twice, close enough that the fabric had bowed in from the weight. There were no prints leading in, only out, straight toward the trees. I stood there, staring at them, until the morning wind erased the edges with drifting leaves. That's when I remembered the breath, the slow exhale right above the tent, and I realized whatever had been there had stayed long enough to listen. I didn't stay to find out more. I drove. Fast. Too fast for those roads. Gravel popped under the tires as I climbed back toward the main ridge. Every few minutes, I'd check the mirror. Not sure what I expected. A figure, maybe, walking the shoulder, still whistling. But the road stayed empty. Only when I hit pavement again did my hand stop shaking long enough to light a cigarette. I don't even smoke anymore. Haven't in years. The nicotine hit my chest like fire, and for a second, the absurdity of it all almost made me laugh. Almost. Then I noticed something that drained every trace of humor from me. The whistle. It came again. Not from the woods, this time from the cab. 3 soft notes, muffled, like coming from under the seat. I slammed the brakes and threw open the door, heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. The cigarette tumbled out of my mouth. I tore through the cab, tossing everything: bags, flashlight, and jacket. My recorder was zipped up in the glove box, untouched. I opened it anyway. The LED was blinking again, recording, but I hadn't turned it on. I hit stop, thumb shaking, and replayed the newest clip. It started with the sound of my own breathing, labored, panicked. That made sense. I'd just been tearing down camp. Then came another sound. Leather creak, gravel crunch, footsteps. The recording had been running while I was loading the truck, and the steps weren't mine. They moved around the vehicle, once slow, deliberate, and then stopped right by the passenger door. A pause. And then, clear as day, just inches from the mic, a whistle. 4 notes again. But the last one changed key. Higher. Almost like it was trying to see if I'd notice. I drove the rest of the way back to town without stopping. Didn't even look at the rearview mirror again. When I finally made it to my place in Whitesburg, I parked 3 streets over, just in case anyone followed, though I knew how ridiculous that sounded. Inside, I set the recorder on the kitchen counter and didn't touch it for hours. I showered, sat on the edge of the bed, tried to convince myself I'd been overtired, that isolation does things to the brain. But when the sun went down, I couldn't stop thinking about those 4 notes, and the fact that the last one was different, like whoever it was had learned the song. By 9 p.m., I gave in, plugged the recorder into my laptop and pulled up the waveform. The program marked sound spikes with color bands. The whistling stood out, clear peaks, consistent intervals. But right after the last 4-note sequence, there was something new, a faint structure under the noise, not static speech, muddied, distant, but there. I slowed it down, filtered it, and the shape of a voice started to emerge. Not words, exactly. More like syllables caught between the inhale and exhale of that whistle. Like someone trying to speak through it. I boosted the volume. That's when I heard it, just 2 words. So faint, I almost missed them. My turn. I jumped back from the desk so hard, the chair tipped over. My skin went cold. I stared at the recorder, half expecting it to play on its own again. It didn't, but the silence that filled the room felt wrong, thick, waiting. I unplugged it and stuffed it in a drawer, slammed it shut. But the air still felt heavy, like someone was standing just behind me, about to breathe down my neck. I turned around fast. Nothing there. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something had followed me out of that hollow. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house sounded like slow footsteps across the floorboards. Around 2 a.m., I started hearing it again, faint, through the thin walls. The whistle, but softer now, almost teasing. I told myself it was wind through the cracks, maybe a loose vent. Then I realized the pattern didn't match any draft I'd ever heard. 3 notes. Pause. 4. The same rhythm. I walked through every room, opened every window, checked the porch. Nothing. The whistling stopped. I stood there in the middle of the living room, trying to steady my breathing. And that's when I noticed it, something dark smeared on the doorframe. I leaned closer. It was mud, a single fingertip drag running downward, and just below it, 4 faint marks, spaced perfectly apart. Like someone had pressed their fingertips there to listen. By morning, I'd made up my mind to call the sheriff. But what would I even say? Someone followed me out of my grandfather's land because I whistled in the dark. Still, I needed to talk to someone. So I drove to see my neighbor, Tom, an old friend of my grandfather's. He lived just a few houses down, the kind of man who still left his boots outside the porch. When I told him what happened, he didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. He just nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the ground. "You whistled, didn't you?" he asked. I hesitated. "Once, maybe twice." Tom sighed, rubbing his jaw. "Your granddad wasn't making that up. There's something down there in that hollow that learns sounds. Always has. Miners used to hear their own voices calling them back up the shafts. That's just..." I stopped myself. "That's folklore, Tom." He looked at me then, eyes clouded but steady. "Then why'd you hear it outside your tent?" I didn't have an answer. That night, I tried to sleep again. I left the lights on, even locked the bedroom door. But fear doesn't care about locks. At 1:11 A.M. I woke to the sound of the recorder clicking on inside the drawer. I hadn't touched it since. No wind, no power surge, just that quiet click. Then the LED blinked. Recording. I sat frozen in bed, watching the drawer like it might open on its own. The whistling started again, faint, right outside the window. 3 notes. 4. Silence. Then, through the thin glass, my voice, whistling, back. It wasn't playback. It wasn't the recorder. It was me. Perfect pitch. Same breathy tone. Except I wasn't moving. My lips were sealed. The sound came again closer. I could hear it inside the walls now, traveling through the vents, like wind carrying a tune. Something brushed the window from outside. A soft tap, 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 that same rhythm from the audio. I grabbed the recorder, hands shaking, and hit stop. The whistling cut off immediately. For a few seconds, the room was dead quiet. Then, from the tiny speaker, without pressing play, a voice whispered, "You taught me." That's when I understood what my grandfather had meant all along. The hollow doesn't echo, it absorbs, takes whatever sound you give it, and makes it its own. And now, every night since, when the wind rolls down from those ridges and the fog creeps low through town, I hear it again, soft, steady, calling from somewhere out in the dark. 3 notes. 4. Pause. Waiting. I don't whistle back anymore. But sometimes, I still hear my own voice out there, trying to. The first photo showed me asleep, not just asleep posed. My head tilted toward the wall, mouth slightly open, one arm resting across my chest. I don't sleep like that. When I first saw it, I thought my friend was messing with me. Except the timestamp said 11:37 p.m., 3 minutes before I opened it, and the photo came through with no signal. We'd rented the cabin for a long weekend, 2 nights outside Elkins, West Virginia, deep in the Monongahela backcountry. My friend Aaron had found it on a local listing site, something run by a retired park ranger. Cheap, off-grid, surrounded by nothing but trees. We were both exhausted, city guys burned out, drifting. The kind of friends who only talked when one of us hit a wall. The idea was to disconnect. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just old boards, a fireplace, and silence. We got there Friday evening, rain still clinging to the ridges. The gravel road twisted for miles until GPS gave up and the signal bars vanished. We laughed it off, that uneasy, nervous kind of laugh people do when the woods suddenly feel too big. The cabin sat in a small clearing, old, sagging. The kind of place where the air smells like wet pine and old smoke. The porch steps bowed under our weight. Inside, it smelled faintly of mold and iron. The floors creaked under every step, and the wallpaper yellowed with age, peeled in long strips that fluttered whenever we passed. Still, we tried to make it ours. We unloaded beer, set up our sleeping bags, lit the fireplace. The crackle of flame brought a kind of comfort. For a while, it even felt cozy, until we noticed the marks. Aaron spotted the first one near the doorframe, a small, faint carving under the peeling wallpaper. At first, we thought it was just wood grain, but when we tugged the corner of paper back, more lines appeared. Jagged, uneven, carved, deep. Not initials, not random scratches, symbols. Roughly triangular, each one formed by 3 intersecting lines, like someone had gouged them with a knife. Some small, some as large as a palm. They ran in patterns up the beams, around the windows, and across the wall behind the fireplace. "What the hell are these?" Aaron muttered, tracing one with his finger. "Old construction marks?" I said, though even as I said it, I knew it wasn't that. They weren't the measured marks of carpenters, they were angry, repetitive, almost desperate, We found a section behind the couch where the wallpaper was bubbled and soft from moisture. I pulled it back. A whole network of the symbols sprawled across the wall underneath. Dozens of them. Aaron stared for a long time, silent. Then he let the paper drop and forced a laugh. Probably some kid trying to freak people out. We agreed not to talk about it. We drank instead, put music on the small Bluetooth speaker, and tried to drown the unease. But that night, when I went to bed, I couldn't stop thinking about those markings, how old they looked, how deep, and how the wallpaper had been glued over them, not under. I woke to the sound of scratching. At first, I thought it was an animal under the floorboards, a raccoon or a possum, but it was too deliberate. Slow, even strokes, like someone dragging something sharp against wood. I glanced toward Aaron's sleeping bag across the room. He was out cold. The fire had burned low, casting the room in an orange-red flicker. The scratching stopped. Then, faintly, came a tap once, against the window. I froze. Another tap. And then silence. When I finally got up the nerve to look, there was nothing outside, just my own reflection in the glass and the dark wall of trees beyond. I told myself it was branches in the wind. But there was no wind that night. Morning brought a weird kind of calm. The forest was soaked in fog, the air heavy with dew. We made coffee on the camping stove, joked about the noises, and decided to go hiking. By daylight, the woods looked almost beautiful. Moss, glowing green, streams cutting silver through the rocks. For hours, we didn't talk about the cabin at all. But when we got back near dusk, something small but unmistakable had changed. The door was ajar, only by an inch, but we both knew we'd locked it. Inside, everything looked the same except the wallpaper we'd peeled the night before was gone. Torn completely off, lying in strips on the floor, the wall beneath was covered in those symbols, hundreds of them, layered on top of each other, like a language written in panic. Aaron's voice was low. "Okay, that's not funny." "I didn't do this," I said. "We searched the place, every room, every closet. Nothing. No footprints on the porch, no mud on the floor. Just the lingering smell of damp paper and something faintly metallic. We told ourselves maybe the humidity had loosened the paper. Maybe it just fell. Neither of us believed that. That night, it started with Aaron's phone. He was scrolling through old photos when his screen flashed a single image that blinked and disappeared before he could tap it. "What was that?" I asked. "Dunno," he said, frowning. "It looked like you." He tried to reopen it, but the gallery lagged, glitching between black screens. Then, a new image appeared at the top of his roll, a blurry, grainy photo of me, sitting by the fire. Except he hadn't taken it. He stared. "Dude, I swear I didn't." Before he could finish, my phone buzzed. New message. Unknown number. No service. The thumbnail loaded slow, pixel by pixel, until it formed the same image, me, sitting by the fire, eyes half-lidded, unaware. Timestamp, 10:42 p.m. I looked up. The clock on the wall said 10:46. "Maybe it cued from earlier," Aaron said weakly, "like when we had reception." But we both knew we hadn't had any since the first hour on the road. We tried to call out just to test. No signal bars, no Wi-Fi. The phones were truly offline. Then another buzz, another photo. This time of Aaron, asleep in his sleeping bag. Timestamp, 11:06 p.m. Then another, me again, lying on my side. Then a fourth, both of us, together, in the frame sleeping. The angle was from above, like someone standing over us. We tore the cabin apart after that, every vent, every corner. Checked for hidden cameras, routers, motion sensors. Nothing. I even cut into the wall behind the couch where the symbols were thickest. The wood beneath was cold, damp, and splintered like it had been scratched from the inside. Aaron wanted to leave. I did too. But the fog outside was too dense to drive. You could barely see the edge of the porch. We decided to wait until morning. He tried to stay awake. I could hear him muttering, pacing, checking the windows. But eventually his voice faded. The fire dimmed to embers. I sat on the floor by the wall, phone in my hand, watching the seconds crawl past 2 a.m. When I finally glanced at the screen, a new notification was waiting. 1. Photo received unknown sender. I opened it. It showed the cabin interior, shot from just behind the doorway. Aaron was asleep. The fire was low, and in the far corner of the frame, half hidden by shadow, was a faint reflection in the window. A face. Mine. But I was holding the camera. I didn't sleep after that last photo. Couldn't. I just sat on the floor beside the cold fireplace, staring at the screen until the battery warning started to flash. Aaron was still asleep, his face half buried in his sleeping bag, one hand resting on his chest. Every time the fire hissed, I flinched. The photo was still open on my phone that shot from the doorway. The faint reflection in the window. My face. But if I had taken the picture, who the hell was holding the camera? At dawn, fog still clung to the trees, heavy and gray. I stepped outside just to breathe something that wasn't recycled fear. The air was cold enough to burn my throat. The woods were silent, too still. Even the birds hadn't started. When I turned back toward the cabin, something about it felt off. The curtains were drawn. They hadn't been before. I opened the door slowly. Aaron was awake, sitting on the edge of his sleeping bag, staring down at his phone. His hands were shaking. "Check your gallery," he said. There were new photos. 12. All time-stamped between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Each one showed us from slightly different angles. Sleeping, breathing, turning. But the last one taken at 3:58 a.m. He made my stomach drop. It showed both of us lying in our bags, except Aaron's eyes were open, looking straight into the lens. He swore he never woke up. We packed within minutes. Didn't even fold the gear, just stuffed everything into our packs and bolted for the truck. The fog was still thick, but we didn't care. We needed to get off that mountain. Aaron drove. I watched the tree line roll by, trying to keep my mind tethered to something practical. Maybe someone had hacked a Wi-Fi camera. Maybe the timestamp glitch was GPS drift. Anything rational. Then the road ended. The map showed a straight line to Route 33, but ahead of us was just forest. No tire tracks, no gravel, just moss and ferns where the path should have been. Aaron slammed the brakes. "This can't be right." We reversed, back down the hill, took another turn. It dead-ended. Same, impossible wall of trees. The fog pressed in tighter, swallowing the edges of the road. "Let's just wait," I said. "It'll clear." He nodded, but his hands gripped the wheels so tight his knuckles were white. The truck idled, heater ticking. Then both our phones buzzed at once. 2 new photos. Identical. The cabin. Empty. Except for a single figure standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the light. It looked like me. Aaron cursed and threw his phone into the dash. "We're leaving. Screw this." He floored it, gravel spraying. The fog thickened, to the point where the world shrank to 10 feet of visibility. Branches clawed at the windshield, scraping long, high-pitched lines that sounded like metal on glass. I checked the GPS again. The blue dots spun in circles, never moving forward. After 20 minutes of blind driving, the headlights hit something. We both gasped. The cabin, same porch, same broken steps. Our tire tracks fresh in the mud out front. Aaron stared, shaking his head. No, no, we went straight. I looked out the window. The forest around us had changed darker, the trees closer, leaning. When I opened the truck door, the air that hit me was colder than before, almost chemical. And somewhere in the distance, faintly click, 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 a sound like a camera shutter. Inside, everything was back the way we'd left it. Our bags by the fireplace, the wallpaper strips gone. Even the couch had been pushed back against the wall like it was before, but the wall itself was bare now, no symbols, just raw wood, smooth and clean. I whispered, "It's not the same cabin." Aaron gave me a look, like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He knew it too. He started the generator, got the lights on, and began pacing. I sat at the table, scrolling through the photos again. They hadn't changed, but every so often, the thumbnails glitched, faces distorting, eyes whiting out. Then, my screen went black. A few seconds later, a new photo appeared. It was the table. Me, sitting there, staring down at my phone. Timestamp. Now. The generator died. Darkness swallowed the cabin, leaving only the blue glow from our phones. Aaron grabbed his flashlight and swept it across the room. The beam hit the far wall and froze. The symbols were back, but this time, they weren't carved. They were drawn in black soot, thick and wet, dripping down the wood. The smell hit next, burned metal and rot. Aaron stepped back, muttering, "We're done. We're gone." He turned toward the door. I heard him fumble with the latch. Then his light flicked upward, and he stopped. "What?" I whispered. He didn't answer. I took the flashlight from him and pointed it where he'd been looking. There, above the doorway, written in the same dripping black soot, were words, "Do not leave." We stayed frozen for what felt like an hour. The only sound was the faint creak of the cabin breathing in the wind. Eventually, I moved toward the back room. The air grew heavier, colder with each step. My breath fogged in front of me. The last door, the one we hadn't opened before, stood slightly ajar. When I pushed it open, my flashlight beam caught something metallic on the floor. A camera. Old, scratched, still powered on. It was aimed at the doorway at me. The screen showed a live feed, except the timestamp was wrong. 4:13 a.m. 3 hours ahead. I watched as the image on the screen moved before I did. My reflection blinked, a split second early, then smiled. I dropped the camera. "Behind me," Aaron shouted. Then, silence. When I turned, the room was empty. I ran into the main room. His flashlight lay on the floor, still on. The door stood open, swinging gently. Outside, the fog glowed faintly, not white, but gray-green, lit from within by some unseen source. I called his name. No answer. Another sound came instead, soft clicks, in rhythm, like a camera snapping continuously somewhere in the dark. I followed it to the edge of the clearing. The fog parted just enough for me to see movement, a figure standing in the trees. Aaron, or something that looked like him. He lifted his phone, flash blinking once, twice. Then he turned and walked deeper into the woods. I should have stopped. I should have run the other way. But I followed. The forest was wrong. The trees leaned inward, trunks slick with condensation, and the air pulsed like it had weight. I kept hearing the shutter sound ahead of me, guiding me like breadcrumbs through the mist. Every few steps, I caught flashes of Aaron's jacket, or what I thought was his jacket. Then, the fog thinned just enough for me to see it. A clearing lit by the beam of a single hanging bulb. The cabin again. But it was smaller, older. The boards warped and blackened, as if burned long ago. Inside, 2 sleeping bags lay side by side on the floor. I stepped closer. My breath froze in my chest. It was us, me and Aaron, asleep. I watched myself stir slightly, mumbling, rolling onto my back. The light bulb flickered. Click. A flash burst from somewhere behind me. When I turned, no one was there, just the open forest, humming faintly. I looked back at the sleeping figures. They hadn't moved. The bulb popped, plunging everything into dark. I don't remember the walk back, just the sound of the camera shutter echoing in my head with every step. When I came to, dawn was breaking. I was lying on the porch, phone in my hand, screen cracked. My clothes were damp, knees raw. The fog had lifted. Birds were singing again. I stumbled inside. The cabin looked different, lived in, almost normal. The soot was gone, the wallpaper intact, no symbols, no smell. Aaron's bag was gone too. Only mine remained. On the table, my phone vibrated once. New photo, unknown sender. I opened it. It showed me standing in the doorway, sunlight on my face, phone in hand. Timestamp. Tomorrow. I left. I don't even remember driving back to Elkins, just the blur of pavement and light. When I finally got service, the first message that came through was from Aaron's mother. He hadn't returned her calls. They found his truck a week later, engine off, doors locked, parked in front of an abandoned ranger station 12 miles from where we'd stayed. No sign of him. Inside, the cab was his phone. The gallery contained over 100 photos. Every single one was of the cabin, empty, except the last. It showed the living room wall. The wallpaper was torn back, symbols carved deep beneath, and, written just above them, in thin, shaky lines, were 4 words. He's still taking pictures. Every night since, my phone vibrates once at 3 a.m. No signal, no number. Just a single new photo, and it's always from behind me. The first time I noticed the missing footage, I thought it was just water damage. The cameras out here take a beating fog, rain, raccoons trying to pry the casings open. But that night, sitting in my ranger station with the soft hum of the generator and a mug of instant coffee going cold beside me, something about the silence on the screen didn't sit right. 3 hours, gone. The data log said the camera had been recording from dusk until dawn, same as always. But between 12 a.m. and 3:17 a.m., all I had was static, not a single frame. At first, I laughed under my breath, trying to make it sound casual in that empty cabin. Guess I'll have to replace the card again. My voice came out louder than I meant it to. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. The forest was a wet black wall beyond the single window, and the beam of my porch light just disappeared into it. I told myself to finish the coffee and go to bed. But I didn't. I kept scrubbing back and forth through the footage, frame by frame, until I landed on the last clear image before the static started. It was time-stamped 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 58 seconds p.m. The frame showed the trail, the same narrow stretch I hiked every day, about 6 miles east of the ranger post. A cluster of birch trees on the right, a small log where I sometimes left feed for deer. Everything perfectly ordinary. Except, in the far distance, standing between 2 trees, was a man, or something shaped like one. I leaned closer, squinting. My own reflection ghosted across the screen, which made it harder to focus. But once my eyes adjusted, the shape came into focus: shoulders, a hood, the faint outline of a backpack. It looked exactly like me. Same jacket, same shape, even the way the head tilted, slightly to the left. I do that when I'm trying to focus through binoculars. I froze. The air in the cabin felt heavy. I tried to reason with it. Maybe someone had stolen one of my old jackets from the supply shed, or maybe it was just a trick of the shadows. But I knew better. I hadn't been out there at all that night. I started working for the Forest Service 5 years ago. My official title is Wildlife Survey Technician, which sounds more glamorous than it is. 90% of the job is just checking motion-triggered trail cameras, replacing batteries, and logging animal activity. I live alone in a cabin near the western edge of Nantahala National Forest, a patch of wilderness so dense and fog-soaked that sometimes you forget the world beyond it even exists. No cell service, no neighbors. The nearest paved road is a 45-minute drive along a Forest Service trail that turns to clay every time it rains. I used to love that isolation. When you spend enough time out here, you start to recognize individual sounds, the groan of a specific pine in the wind, the creak of the porch step, even the small difference between the cry of an owl and the scrape of a branch. But lately, I'd been hearing something I couldn't identify. It started about a week before the missing footage, this faint, rhythmic clicking sound that came from the woods after midnight. Not like an animal, more like a tongue against teeth, or two rocks tapping together, always in threes, click, 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 then silence. I'd step outside with my flashlight, the cold air rushing into my lungs, but by then, it would be gone. That night, after seeing the footage, I kept hearing it again, somewhere beyond the porch. Click, click, click. I muted the laptop and listened. The forest held its breath. Then, faintly, it came again, a few yards off the tree line. I grabbed my light and stepped out. The beam cut through the mist, catching on raindrops like dust motes. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the generator. I swept the light across the trees, the ferns, the wet ground. Nothing. Then the light caught movement, a shape slipping between trunks, just at the edge of range. "Hey," I called. It didn't stop, just kept moving deeper, like it knew the exact angle to avoid being seen. I thought about calling it in, but to who? Nobody was awake at base camp this late, and I'd sound like a paranoid idiot reporting a ghost in the woods. So instead, I did what I always do. I logged it. 0:43 a.m. Unidentified movement near station perimeter. Possible trespasser. The clicking stopped after that. But I didn't sleep. By morning, the fog had rolled so thick I couldn't see the ridge from my porch. The forest felt wrong, too quiet. Even the birds stayed low. I took the truck out anyway. I had 6 cameras to check that day, all spaced along a 7-mile route that wound around a ridgeline overlooking Lake Nantahala. Each one was marked with a small orange tag, nailed into a tree standard issue, easy to spot. Except one of them wasn't. When I reached camera 4, the tag was missing. The bark where it had been nailed was clean, not torn off, just gone. Like it had been carefully sanded smooth. The camera itself still hung from the tree, but the strap had been adjusted, tightened, and the lens pointed about 5 degrees off its normal angle, just enough to shift the frame away from the trail. I checked the memory card. The last recording was from the night before, ending exactly at 3:17 a.m., the same time the static ended on the first camera. That's when the pattern hit me. I checked the other cameras on the route. Every one of them stopped at that same minute, 3:17. I wrote it down, the numbers repeating in my head like a code. Back at the cabin that evening, I synced all the cards to my laptop. The files transferred in silence, the progress bar crawling while the sky outside turned from gray to black. Each video started normally, deer passing through, a fox, the slow drift of fog, and then, without warning, the static. White noise that crackled like distant rain for exactly 197 minutes. Then, clear footage again, as if nothing happened. But the static wasn't empty. When I turned the volume up, there was something underneath it. Not speech, not wind. A low, almost rhythmic tone, like breathing through a hollow pipe. I stared at the waveform, watching the small, uneven peaks rise and fall. Then, in the final 2 seconds before the footage cleared, a faint whisper slipped through. It was just a few syllables, impossible to make out, until I slowed the playback. At half speed, it sounded like someone saying my name, twice. The next morning, I drove to the ranger station 10 miles east, where my supervisor, Landon, handled all digital reports. When I showed him the footage, he chuckled, shaking his head. "Must be data corruption," he said. "Happens all the time out here. Electromagnetic interference, humidity, whatever. Hell, you probably walked past one of the sensors without realizing it." "I didn't," I said. My voice came out more defensive than I meant. "That's not me on the camera." Landon gave me this look, not mocking, but the kind you give someone who's been alone too long. "Take a break, man. Seriously. You've been out here since May." He wasn't wrong. I'd spent 47 straight nights in that cabin. Still, as I drove back through the forest, the unease crawled up my throat. The road narrowed between two slopes, thick with spruce and beech, and the fog hung so dense that the world felt reduced to the reach of my headlights. Halfway back, something crossed the road ahead. Not an animal. A figure walking fast, hunched, wearing the same forest green jacket I had on. I slammed the brakes. Gravel scattered, but by the time I jumped out, the road was empty. The only sound was the slow drip of condensation from the trees. That night, I set one of my backup cameras facing the front porch, aimed toward the tree line, just for my own sanity. At midnight, the clicking sound returned, louder this time. Click, 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 then silence. I turned off the light and looked out. The window. The fog had thickened again, swallowing the world in gray. And there, just at the edge of visibility, stood a figure, motionless, facing the cabin. I froze. Every instinct screamed to grab my rifle, but I couldn't move. The longer I stared, the more certain I became that it wasn't a person standing still. It was someone standing exactly like me. Same posture, same angle of the head. Then the porch light flickered. Once. Twice. When it steadied again, the figure was gone. I backed away from the window, heart thudding so hard it hurt. I went to the laptop, opened the porch camera feed, and watched the live footage. Nothing but fog and static. Until, at 3:17 a.m., the screen froze, and a single frame appeared. Me, standing in the woods, facing the camera, except my mouth was open, like I was trying to speak. Then, the feed went black. When I woke up, the generator was off. No hum, no fan, just silence. The air inside the cabin felt thick, humid, like I'd been breathing someone else's exhale. My clock read 3:19 a.m., though I could have sworn I'd only closed my eyes a minute ago. My laptop screen still glowed faintly on the desk, frozen on that last frame, my face staring out from the woods, mouth slightly open as if mid-sentence. The image looked wrong, blurry around the edges, almost too dark to make out, but the eyes, they looked terrified. I reached out and touched the touchpad, half expecting it to be gone, but the image didn't flicker, just sat there, still and cold. That's when I realized something was off with the angle. The frame wasn't just pointed at the porch anymore. I could see the cabin window, the one right beside my bed, reflected in the screen's corner, which meant the camera had been moved, and whoever moved it had filmed me sleeping. I stumbled out onto the porch, flashlight shaking in my hand. The fog was a living thing, thick, pale, shifting like smoke around the tree line. The ground was soft beneath my boots, fresh impressions in the mud leading away from the steps. Not animal prints, boots, Mine. I followed them, heart pounding so hard it blurred into the sound of my breath. The prints wove through the pines, looping back toward the survey trail, until they stopped abruptly at a clearing about 50 yards out. In the middle of that clearing, there was a small pile of dirt, freshly turned, and sticking out of it, half buried, was one of my trail cameras. The lens was cracked, the strap torn, but the red indicator light blinked faintly. Recording. I crouched, brushing the dirt off, and that's when I saw the writing carved into the back panel. 3 small lines, etched into the plastic with something sharp. 3:17, the same timestamp. The air around me felt charged, electric, like the moment before a thunderclap. I grabbed the camera, shoved it into my pack, and hurried back to the cabin, trying not to look over my shoulder. But every few steps, I felt that pressure behind me, that prickling awareness of being watched. When I reached the porch, my flashlight dimmed, then died. Everything went black. Inside, I locked the door and sat against the wall, trying to breathe. I could still hear the forest outside, the soft hiss of fog against branches, the slow groan of the trees shifting in the damp. Then, from the woods, came that sound again. Click, click, click. Louder now, closer. The first knock hit the window glass, gentle, like someone tapping with their fingernail. I aimed the flashlight weak beam, flickering, and caught a blur of pale skin before it vanished back into the fog. For a long time, I didn't move, just sat there in the dark, listening to my pulse. Finally, I forced myself to check the new footage. The camera I'd pulled from the dirt was still working, recording even now. I ejected the card and slid it into the laptop. The first few files were the same static. Then, at 3:17 a.m., an image appeared. It was the clearing, same as before. But standing there, staring straight into the lens, was me. Not like the other shots. This time, it wasn't a blur or distant shape. It was clear. Too clear. My face was smeared with dirt, eyes wide, mouth open in that same half-spoken shape. But this time, I wasn't alone in the frame. Behind me, just barely visible in the mist, was another silhouette, taller. Its hand rested on my shoulder. By morning, I'd convinced myself it had to be a trick. Double exposure, a glitch, anything. But the fear didn't fade. I needed to get out. The radio at the ranger station wasn't responding, and my truck's battery had died overnight, drained flat, like something had been running while it was off. I grabbed my pack, my rifle, and the external drive with all the footage, and started walking the service road. The fog hadn't lifted. Every sound was magnified, the crunch of gravel, the soft hiss of rain on leaves, my own breathing echoing off the trees. I kept glancing behind me, certain I'd see someone following. At one point, I heard it again. Click, click, click. Off to my right. I stopped. Waited. Hello? Silence. Then a whisper, carried low through the mist. My name. I spun toward the sound. Nothing there, just the outline of trees fading into gray. The whisper came again, this time from the other side. And that's when I realized it wasn't echoing, it was coming from ahead of me. The road ended at the ranger outpost, but the door was open. I called out for Landon. No answer. The generator was running, lights on, coffee half full on the counter. His jacket still hung by the door, but the monitors, all 8 security feeds, were showing static. All except one. The top left screen displayed a live feed from the East Trail, my trail, and there I was, standing in the middle of the frame, motionless, facing the camera. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m., but it wasn't night. It was broad daylight. I blinked, and the image flickered. The figure moved closer, one step at a time, until its face filled the screen. my face. But the eyes were wrong, milky, unfocused, like something looking through the lens instead of at it. The speaker crackled. "Why did you bury it?" the voice whispered. Mine, but deeper, slower, warped by static. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The screens all blinked out at once, plunging the room into silence. I don't remember leaving. I just remember running. Branches tore at my sleeves. Roots tripped my boots, and the fog seemed to close around me, erasing every familiar landmark. At some point, I lost the trail completely. By late afternoon, I found myself back at the clearing, the same one with the buried camera. Only now, there were 2 mounds of dirt, one fresh. The camera light blinked again, red against the soil. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe I just needed to prove I was still real, that the world still made sense. I dropped to my knees and started digging. The earth was soft, wet, easy to move. After a few inches, something metallic scraped against my fingers. I pulled it free. Another trail camera. Same model, same tag number as before, but it was dented, rusted, like it had been buried for years. I flipped open the panel. Inside, the SD card was still intact. I wiped the mud off and slid it into my pocket. When I stood, I noticed something carved into the side of the dirt mound. Not words this time. Numbers. Dozens of them, overlapping, scratched into the soil and roots. Each one read 317. Over and over. I ran. By the time I reached the cabin again, the fog had started to thin. The evening light filtered through in weak gold streaks, touching the wood like it had been waiting all day for a break. Inside, the laptop was still open, still glowing faintly. The clock on the wall read 3:17. That shouldn't have been possible. It was almost dusk. My hand shook as I slid the card into the slot. The video opened, automatically. The screen showed me sitting exactly where I was now. Same position, same shirt, same angle of light. For a moment, I thought it was just the laptop's camera, showing my reflection. But then, the me on screen looked up and smiled, and I didn't. The camera panned slightly, like someone was holding it. The other me reached out toward the screen, mouthing something. I couldn't hear it at first, so I turned up the volume. The whisper came through. "Don't leave again." The video froze. Then, without warning, the cabin's lights went out. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe an hour, maybe less. The air felt charged again, humming through the floorboards. I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the porch. They stopped right outside the door. Then came that same sound, impossibly close now. Click, click, click. When I finally looked up, the glow of the laptop screen reflected something in the window. A shape standing behind me. I turned, but there was no one there. Only the open doorway and the forest beyond. The fog was back, rolling in waves. I grabbed my flashlight, the last working one, and stepped outside. The beam cut through the gray for maybe 10 feet before vanishing. That's when I saw it. Out in the trees, a figure was walking away. Same build, same jacket, same gait. Me. It stopped halfway down the trail and turned, as if waiting. Then raised one hand and beckoned. I should have gone back inside. I should have locked the door. But I followed. The fog swallowed the light almost instantly. I kept walking, counting my steps, trying to stay oriented. But the air grew heavier, colder. My breath came out in quick bursts, each one fogging the beam. Then the ground beneath my boots changed from dirt to something soft. I angled the flashlight down. Boot prints, hundreds of them, layered over one another, circling the same patch of earth again and again. All mine. At the center of the prints lay my pack, unzipped, empty, and just beside it my trail camera, still recording. The red light blinked. I crouched, staring into the lens. My reflection stared back, faint and warped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly, from the speaker, I heard breathing. Slow, steady, not mine. And then my own voice whispered through the static, "You're late." The camera clicked once, and everything went dark. They found my cabin weeks later, after the Forest Service reported missed check-ins. Generator empty, laptop battery dead. The footage recovered from the cameras showed nothing but static except for one frame, time-stamped 3:17 a.m. It showed the porch, and me, standing there in the fog, smiling faintly as someone, just out of frame, placed a hand on my shoulder. Every night since, I still hear that clicking, and when I check the clock, it's always 3:17. I still don't know why we went up there that day. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe it was the same stupid curiosity that's gotten people killed in these woods for 100 years. Cheat Mountain has that kind of pull, quiet, endless, and wrong in a way that doesn't show up in photos. My cousin Jared and I had been camping near Shaver's Fork for 2 nights. It was early October, the air wet enough to sting your lungs. Around noon, we spotted the old fire tower through the fog, its steel frame rising like a skeleton above the tree line. The forest below was silent, not even the usual chatter of birds. Jared grinned. "Bet no one's been up there since the 72nds, he said, shouldering his pack. I should have told him no. The first thing that struck me wasn't the height, it was how intact everything was. The metal ladder wasn't rusted, the steps didn't creak, and the hatch at the top, though streaked with rain, opened like it had been oiled yesterday. Inside, it smelled of cedar and something else faint, chemical, like film developer. Dustless floor, folded blanket, coffee mug on a small wooden table, a lantern with new batteries, and on the far wall, tacked neatly above the window, a single Polaroid photograph. It was us. Jared, halfway up the stairs. Me, below, looking up. I laughed at first, the absurdity of it. Jared didn't. He just stood there, staring at the photo, his expression tightening like he was trying to remember something. "When did you take that?" he asked. I didn't. That's when the wind picked up. The tower groaned that high, metallic hum that sounds almost like a voice if you listen too long. I reached for the Polaroid. The edges were warm. "Man, someone's screwing with us," Jared muttered. "Maybe hunters left it." But there were no tracks below, no tire marks, nothing but our own footprints in the mud. We stayed longer than we should have, maybe an hour. Jared kept peeking down the ladder, like he expected someone to follow us. I started noticing tiny things. The blanket was damp, but not dusty. The mug had the faint ring of recent coffee. And the walls, they had scratches in them, small lines running vertically, like someone dragging their nails down the wood, inch by inch. I took another look at the Polaroid. Behind Jared's shoulder, just at the edge of the frame, was a dark blur, maybe a tree trunk, maybe not. But the longer I looked, the less it looked like bark. When I pointed it out, Jared snatched the photo off the wall. "Let's go," he said. We climbed down without talking. The forest felt different now. The mist had thickened, heavy enough to bead on our eyelashes. By the time we reached camp, Jared had gone quiet, clutching the photo in his jacket pocket. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every few minutes, he'd sit up and glance toward the tree line. "You hear that?" he whispered once. It was just rain tapping on the tarp. Or at least, I thought it was. At dawn, Jared was gone. His sleeping bag was zipped, his boots missing. The Polaroid lay on the log by the fire pit, except it wasn't the same one. It showed me, sitting alone beside the extinguished fire. And this time, I wasn't looking at the camera. I was looking toward the trees. I waited until noon before admitting Jared wasn't coming back. The forest was still, too still, like it was waiting for me to move first. His footprints trailed toward the ridge, then vanished halfway through the clearing, the soil flattening into slick leaves. I packed my gear, but I didn't leave. Something in me needed to know the kind of pull that doesn't feel like choice. By the time I reached the tower again, fog had swallowed the upper platform. The metal stairs hissed under my boots. When I climbed through the hatch, the air was warmer, stale, and the faint chemical smell was stronger than before. The mug, the blanket, the lantern, all still there. But now, there were 3 Polaroids pinned to the wall. The first was the same one of us entering. The second showed Jared standing outside the tower base, looking up. And the third, the newest one, showed me halfway up the ladder, taken from above. I froze. My heart tried to claw its way out of my chest. The photo was still damp, the ink not fully set. Whoever took it had been here minutes ago. I whispered his name. Nothing answered but the tower's slow breathing in the wind. A sound came from beneath the floorboards, faint, rhythmic. Click. A mechanical click, like a camera shutter. I knelt, listening. Another click, closer this time. I pulled the blanket aside and found a square cut in the wooden planks. The hatch lifted easily. The smell hit first, musty, metallic, and sweet. I aimed my flashlight down. The space beneath the tower wasn't much taller than a crawl space, lined with old insulation and Polaroids. Hundreds of them, strung like prayer flags on thin fishing line. All faces. Some blurred, some half-burned, some familiar. I saw Jared's jacket in one. Then my own reflection, repeated over and over in slightly different angles, like someone had been cataloging me for days. Then I heard breathing. Not mine, not above, right behind me. I turned the light. For a split second, I thought it was Jared, crouched there until I saw the eyes. Wide, unblinking, filmed over like waterlogged glass. His mouth twitched, but the rest of him didn't move. Around his neck hung a Polaroid camera, old and cracked, the flash bulb still faintly glowing. I couldn't make myself speak. I just backed away, hand shaking, trying not to make a sound. His voice came out like air leaking through a crack. "You took too long." He raised the camera. Flash, everything went white. When my sight cleared, I was standing outside the tower, breath clouding in the cold. My ears rang. The hatch above me was closed, and the fog had thinned just enough to see the treetops. No one was there. I stumbled back toward camp, half expecting to see Jared waiting, but the campsite was gone. The clearing was bare except for one thing: a fresh Polaroid pinned to a tree with my hunting knife. It showed the fire tower in the distance. At the top window, a figure leaned against the glass. I stared at it for a long time, then looked up toward the mountain. The tower window was empty. That was 2 years ago. They never found Jared, and I stopped trying to explain it. Sometimes I think about going back, but I know what I'd find: the same clean floor, the same mug, the same wall of faces, and maybe another Polaroid waiting for me. I keep mine in a drawer now, under a pile of maps. Every few weeks, I check it, and every time, there's a new one beneath it, grainy, slightly crooked. Last night's shows me asleep in my own bed. I first heard the second set of footsteps about 2 hours into the hike. They weren't loud, just the faint crunch of leaves lagging maybe 10, 12 feet behind me. I stopped. They stopped. When I moved again, so did they. Always the same rhythm, like someone walking in sync just behind the bend. But each time I turned, the trail behind me was empty, just wind stirring the trees and a long stretch of mossy path curling into the woods. I told myself it was nothing. Deer, maybe, or paranoia. I was alone, sure, but I'd done solo trips before Olympic, Smokies, Shenandoah, the Monongahela Forest, though it felt different, older, somehow, like the woods weren't watching me exactly, but remembering me. I made camp just before dusk, near a shallow creek that fed down into a hollow. The air smelled of wet bark and earth, and everything had that muted Appalachian quiet where you hear your own breath louder than the forest. I gathered some stones, set a fire, and pitched the tent on a dry patch of pine needles. When I knelt to unzip my bag, I noticed the sound again. Crunch, pause, crunch. I held my breath, let it out slow, turned my head, and called out, not loud, just enough to cut the silence. Hello? Nothing. Just the hiss of the creek behind me and the low creak of a tree leaning somewhere in the dark. That night, I barely slept. Not from fear, not yet, but from a kind of half-listening. You ever try to sleep while still paying attention? Like part of you is awake, alert, waiting for something. Around 2 a.m., I heard the steps again, this time circling the edge of my camp. Soft, deliberate, then fading. The next morning, I walked the area, expecting maybe raccoon tracks or a coyote trail. Instead, I found nothing, not even my own boot prints from the night before. The pine needles had settled smooth. Day 2, I hiked higher up through a thinning ridgeline, where the trees grew farther apart and everything felt brighter. I didn't hear the footsteps that day, but I felt them. That's worse, somehow. Like the space behind me was just a little too full. That evening, I returned to the same site. I should have moved on, but I told myself I was being dramatic, irrational, sleep-deprived. I made tea, read by headlamp, and tucked into my sleeping bag early. I even laughed at myself when a branch snapped somewhere upstream. But around 3:30 a.m., I woke up cold. Not just chilly cold, like something had opened the air. My fire had long gone out. I sat up, blinking, adjusting to the faint moonlight filtering through the mesh of my tent. And that's when I saw them. Muddy boot prints, not mine. Too large, too wide in the stance, starting at the edge of the creek, crossing the pine needle floor, stopping right at the foot of my sleeping bag. Just ending there. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the prints, heart pounding so hard I thought the tent walls would echo with it. And then I saw the worst part. There were 2 sets. One set came toward the tent, and the other led back out. Like whoever it was had stood there watching me close enough to touch, and then simply walked away. But I hadn't heard a single thing. Not a zipper, not a footstep, not even the creak anymore. Just silence. And I swear, somewhere out in that silence, something was still standing, watching, waiting. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I stayed curled inside the sleeping bag, staring at the boot prints through the tent wall until the first pale smear of daylight crept through the trees. I waited until the fog lifted enough to see past the clearing, then unzipped the tent, slow, breath shallow, half expecting to see someone standing just beyond the trees. But there was nothing. No tracks in the soft ground leading away, no broken branches, just those muddy prints already fading as the morning dew soaked them into the forest floor. I packed everything fast. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled the tent poles. I didn't even eat. I just needed to move. I decided to cut my trip short, head south toward the service road that looped back to where I parked. But here's the thing. I never found that road. I followed the same trail I'd mapped the day before, checked the GPS, even pulled out the paper backup. The forest should have opened up around the ridge, spilled out into the old gravel stretch they used for logging runs. But the path kept curving, kept dipping into hollows I didn't recognize. At some point, I passed a dead tree with a split trunk, and 20 minutes later, I passed it again. The exact same tree. I stopped, turned in a full circle. I wasn't panicking yet, but I could feel my body starting to go cold again. Not from the weather, from confusion, from the growing realization that something wasn't lining up. That afternoon, I hiked until my thighs ached, and my water was down to a third. I saw no other hikers, no rangers, not even a single plane overhead. And the whole time, I had this itch in the back of my skull, like if I turned fast enough, I'd catch someone ducking out of sight. I camped again that night because I had no choice. I found a flat spot near a ridge and forced myself to eat half a protein bar. I didn't build a fire. I wanted to be invisible. I didn't sleep. I couldn't, because around midnight, the footsteps came back. But this time, they didn't stop at the edge of camp. They circled. Once, twice, then a long pause, then a single step, then another, closer, right up against the side of the tent. I held my breath so tight my vision dimmed. I could hear them breathing, slow, low, like someone trying not to be heard. And then, they crouched. I saw the shadow shift. I don't remember what happened next, not clearly. There's a blank spot, like a cut in the film. I must have blacked out or passed out from fear. When I came to, it was daylight again. I was outside the tent, on my back in the pine needles. My boots were still on, but my backpack was open, my food was gone, and worse, my knife was laid across my chest. Not tucked into its sheath, not dropped, placed, like whoever was out there wanted me to know. They could have done anything. I left everything behind except for my water and the blade. I walked for hours, delirious, until finally, just past a break in the trees, I saw a sliver of asphalt. The road. Real. Solid. I nearly cried when I heard a truck in the distance. I made it back to my car. I drove 3 hours without stopping. When I got home, I locked the door and slept with the lights on for 3 nights. I reported the prints to the rangers. They said maybe it was a poacher, maybe a lost hiker. You'd be surprised how weird people get in those woods, one of them told me. But here's the part I don't tell anyone. 3 days after I got home, a package showed up on my porch, no return address. Inside was a single photo, printed on cheap paper. It was a trail cam shot, black and white, grainy. It showed me, zipped up in my tent, fast asleep, and standing right behind me, just outside the mesh window, was a tall figure in a hooded coat, head tilted, hands at their sides, just watching me. There are no trail cams in Monongahela where I camped, none I set up, and I never told anyone where I'd gone. Every night since, I still hear footsteps in the hallway outside my room, soft, slow, and always one step behind. The air changed the moment I passed the trail marker. I didn't notice it at first, not consciously, but looking back, the forest went still in a way I've never felt before. Not quiet, still. No wind, no chirping, not even the rustle of squirrels darting through underbrush. Just a deep, unnatural hush that pressed against my chest like a held breath. I was about 3 hours into a solo hike near Klingman's Dome, trying to clear my head after a brutal winter back home in Roanoke. It was late April. Snow melt still clung to the hollows, but the ridgelines were soft with early green. I had planned to do a standard out and back, nothing ambitious, but then I saw it. A narrow path veering off to the right, just beyond a fallen hemlock. No blaze, no signage, just that faint dip in the earth that told me someone or something had walked it often enough to wear it down. I should have ignored it. I should have kept moving, but something about it pulled at me. It didn't feel threatening. If anything, It felt quietly waiting, like the woods had opened their coat just wide enough to say, "Come look." So, I stepped off the known trail and onto the forgotten one. The further I went, the narrower it got. Rhododendron branches brushed against my shoulders. Old stones jutted through the dirt like crooked teeth. I passed a rusted metal sign, half buried in leaves, with no readable markings left on it. The air smelled different, not bad, just dry, like paper and pine sap. I started to notice this low hum under everything. I figured it was distant traffic from U.S. 441, or maybe wind through the trees, but there was no wind. After maybe 40 minutes of hiking, no GPS signal, of course I reached it. A crumbling stone archway, maybe 10 feet high, rising from the middle of nowhere, like the entrance to an old estate that had long since disappeared. It was moss-covered, cracked, but still somehow intact. The stones were huge, blackened with age and streaked with orange lichen. And carved into the keystone above the arch was a single, deeply etched shape. A spiral, like a coiled fern or an ear. Not a symbol I recognized. I stood there, frozen. Not out of fear, not yet, but out of something older. Like I just walked into a room and couldn't remember why. I took one picture with my phone. It didn't save. Stupidly, I stepped through. I don't know what I expected. Another meadow? A cabin ruin? But what I got was something much stranger. The forest beyond the arch looked almost identical. Same trees, same light. But it felt wrong. The ground was soft, too soft, like walking on thick carpet. The color of the light was off, a bit too yellow, like old tungsten bulbs instead of sun. And that low vibration in my chest? Stronger now. Not a sound. A feeling, like my sternum was trying to match the frequency of something underground. I turned to look behind me. The arch was gone. I know how that sounds. I do. But I swear, I turned around and the trees were solid. No clearing, no structure. Just more of the same, unbroken forest. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, spun in a slow circle, nothing. Every direction looked the same, but nothing looked familiar. That's when I realized I hadn't seen a bird in hours. No rustle of wings, no insect buzz. Even my own footsteps felt swallowed, like the forest had put pillows down under every leaf. I took a deep breath and tried to retrace my steps. 5 minutes later, I passed the same dead birch I'd already walked by, a split in the trunk shaped like a jagged Y. Panic flickered. I sat down on a rock to drink some water and think. That's when I noticed something carved into the trunk of the tree. Not initials, just a date. 1973. Fresh. The wood beneath was raw and white, like it had been gouged that morning. But that couldn't be. The tree was old, brittle. That bark should have been dark, dried. I stood and started walking faster. My breathing got shallow. Every tree felt like it was watching. Every step sounded like an echo. I forced myself not to run. Then I heard it. A voice. Far off. Just one word. Hey. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't frantic. It was casual, like someone calling to a friend across a parking lot. A single syllable, drawn out just enough to carry. I spun around. Nothing. I walked 10 more minutes. Same voice. Hey. Different direction. Closer. I shouted back. Hello? I'm lost. No reply. Just the windless hush. Except now, I wasn't alone. I could feel it, that pressure. That sense you get when someone walks up behind you in a quiet room. I turned and turned again, every direction the same. But something was always just barely out of view. I finally stopped and pulled my phone out again. No signal. I went to check the time. My phone was off. I tried to restart it. Dead. I'd left camp with a full charge. Hadn't used it except for that one photo. I looked down to put the phone away, and that's when I saw it, the rock I was standing next to. Same one I sat on before, same lichen pattern. Same dent on the edge, like a bite taken out of it. I hadn't moved at all. That's when the breathing started. Not mine. It was soft, wet, just behind my left ear, like someone exhaling into a microphone, close enough that I felt the heat of it on my neck. I spun so fast I almost fell. Nothing. But the rock was different now. On its surface, someone had drawn something in ash. Or maybe charcoal. A spiral. The same shape from the arch. I wiped it off with my sleeve. Heart pounding. But my fingers came away clean. There was nothing on the rock. Nothing at all. That's when I realized something that froze me. Worse than fear ever could. I hadn't heard myself breathe in minutes. I tried. I really did, but my lungs wouldn't move right. Like I was trying to inhale underwater. Each breath was tight, shallow, useless. And then came the whisper. Not a voice. A sound. Inside my head. It said, "You're already part of it." And then, all at once, I saw the trail again. Wide open. Clear. Just behind me. I ran. I ran without checking my footing. Without thinking. Branches sliced my arms. Rocks rolled under my boots. But I didn't stop until I saw daylight, real daylight, and the edge of a clearing that looked blessedly, stupidly normal. I stumbled into it, panting, crying without meaning to, and that's when I realized something I still can't explain. My boots were dry, bone dry, even though the trail had been slick, the moss damp, the air heavy. There wasn't a drop of mud or moisture on them. I checked my water bottle. Full, completely untouched. I'd been gone for hours, I thought, but my watch said it had only been 11 minutes. Then I looked up and saw something that made me drop the bottle. Carved into the tree, right in front of me, not old, not weathered, was the spiral, but beneath it was my last name. I stared at the tree for a long time. The spiral alone might have been coincidence. A stretch, but possible. But my last name? That snapped something in me. Not panic, not yet. Something colder, like the moment when your body realizes a wound is real and the adrenaline hasn't caught up yet. It wasn't carved like graffiti. It was deliberate, clean, fresh. The bark was still curled at the edges of the letters. Winslow. Just 6 letters, etched like a signature below the spiral. I stepped back instinctively and nearly tripped. My foot hit something hard, hidden under a layer of leaves. I bent down, brushing them away. It was a metal plaque, half buried, bolted to a flat stone like some kind of grave marker. I wiped it clean. Property boundary, Appalachian Survey Corps. Established 1912. Reclaimed 1973. Reclaimed? That word stuck in my head like a splinter. I don't remember the walk back, not clearly. 1 minute I was standing over that plaque, and the next I was emerging onto the gravel pull-off where my car was parked. The sun was lower, but not much. I checked my phone again. Still dead. My boots, still spotless. I drove back to my campsite near Deep Creek in silence, trying not to look in the rearview mirror, because for a second, just for a blink, I thought I saw someone sitting in the back seat. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice again. You're already part of it. But it didn't sound threatening anymore. It sounded resigned, like someone telling you the results of a test you already knew you failed. The next morning, I broke camp and drove straight into Bryson City. I needed noise, movement, people. I needed cell service. At a diner near the river, I asked the waitress if she'd ever heard of an old trail near Klingman's Dome with a stone archway. She froze for just a second. Then, with a smile too quick to be real, she said, "Oh, honey, people get turned around up there all the time. Best to stay on the marked trails." She slid my check across the table without asking if I wanted anything else. I paid and left. I was back in Roanoke by nightfall. Told myself I'd had a weird experience. Maybe heat stroke, maybe stress. Told myself I'd forget. I didn't. Over the next few days, small things started going wrong. I'd hear someone whisper my name in the house when I was alone. My boots, the same ones I wore on the hike, would be soaked through with mud in the morning, even if I hadn't touched them. Worse, I started waking up to find my front door unlocked. I live alone. The third night, I put a trail cam inside the living room, pointed at the door. The next morning, I checked the footage. The video was corrupted, all except the first frame. It showed me sleeping on the couch, and just behind me, barely visible in the reflection of the window, was a shape. Tall, still, watching. I called a friend, a park ranger named Jake, who worked out of Cherokee. I didn't tell him the whole story, just asked if anything weird had ever happened near Clingman's Dome. He was quiet for a while, then said something that made my blood go cold. "I don't know about recent reports," he said, "but I do know they shut down some old side trails back in the 70s. Claimed it was due to erosion, but unofficially, there were disappearances. Hikers who went in and didn't come back. No remains. No gear. Nothing." I asked if he knew about a stone archway. Silence. Then, "You saw it?" I didn't answer. He just exhaled sharply. "I gotta go," he said. "Don't go back. Not even in your head." Then, he hung up. That night, I dreamed of the forest again. But this time, I wasn't alone. I was standing at the arch, and someone was waiting on the other side. Not a person, exactly a figure. Same height as me, same clothes, same face, but no eyes. Just smooth skin where they should have been. It smiled. Not with its mouth, with my mouth. And then it whispered, "You left me there." I woke up, gasping. My boots were sitting at the foot of the bed, dripping wet. The next morning, I drove to the university library and pulled old land use records. It took hours, but I found something. Appalachian Survey Corps, a private exploration outfit that operated through the early 1900s. They mapped deep forest zones for development, but several entries noted areas marked not for reclamation, anomalous. In 1973, the organization dissolved. No reason listed. But the last recorded activity? Clingman's Dome sector. The final note in the ledger read, "Boundary sealed. Entity contained. No further expeditions authorized." I returned home in a daze. When I opened the door, I stopped cold. There were muddy boot prints on the hardwood floor. Not fresh. Dry. Like they'd been there for hours. They matched mine. Exactly. But I hadn't been home all day. I followed the prints, heart hammering. They led into the hallway, then into the bedroom. Then they stopped halfway across the floor, mid-step. No prints leading away, just one set, going in. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like an hour. Then the closet door creaked open behind me, empty. But carved into the inside panel, where I know I'd never touched, was a small spiral, and beneath it, the same date from the tree. 1973. I don't remember screaming. I just remember falling to my knees and pressing my hands over my ears. But the vibration didn't stop. It wasn't sound anymore. It was memory playing backward. Images I'd never seen before started flashing behind my eyes. An old survey team marching through dense fog. A collapsed tent soaked in blood. a man carving the spiral into his own chest. And over all of it, a voice I recognized. Mine, repeating one phrase, again and again. You were never meant to come back. Now, 2 weeks later, I'm still trying to make sense of it. I haven't slept more than an hour at a time. I've found 3 more spirals in the frost on my windshield, scratched into the inside of my sink drain, even drawn faintly in the dust on my rearview mirror. I stopped using mirrors altogether. And sometimes, at night, I see myself standing outside the house. Not someone me. Same clothes, same face, but his eyes are just off. A little too wide, a little too still, like he's waiting for me to invite him in. I haven't. But last night, I heard the front door open. I ran out with a bat, lights blazing. Nothing, just my boots wet again. And something else, carved into the inside of the door frame. You didn't turn around in time. Some nights I try to convince myself it was all a hallucination, a break, a trick of stress and fatigue. But I know better, because I still feel it. That low vibration, that presence behind the veil of bark and moss and memory. And I know deep down I never really left. I walk around during the day pretending I'm still me, but I done. I know the real me is still out there, waiting to take my place back.